I talked to him about, well, what is the cost of going against the church? There was this silence, and he started crying. He said, you just become incredibly isolated and lonely. You're so interested in American history, you think that's our history. It's not. This is our history. This is what happened in an Australian side street.
Hello and welcome to Separate Bathrooms. We would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay our respects to the elders both past and present. I'm Cam Daddo.
I'm Ali Daddo.
It's great to have you with us today.
Who, me or just...
No, you, listener, and we are us, and it's great.
And we are many. It's a song.
It is a song. You could sing that. I am, you are.
Yeah.
We are
Australia.
There you go.
Or the rest of the world, whoever's listening, as we were saying before.
Because we do go worldwide. It's a flat world now that we have the wonderful intraweb.
Are you a flat earther?
No.
Okay, good.
I'm speaking metaphorically
Yes.
since the internet's happened, because you can access stuff all over the world.
Well, we listen to American podcasts and...
I watched, on an overseas trip, I can watch a live AFL NRL football game.
That was cool.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
How's your jet lag?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm all right.
We've just come back from an overseas jaunt catching up with our daughter. Yeah, who's been gone for 9 months. So it was great to see her and her boyfriend, Miles, and hang out. So, but I tell you, the jet lag is very strange. I said to Ali this morning, I'm thinking that I'm going to do some Wim Hof ice bathing to reset my body.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
That's the feeling I got
Yep.
when I was standing under the cold shower this morning going,
Yeah, great.
Dude, do an ice bath, see how that goes.
Yeah. I'm going to sit by the heater.
Very good.
Yeah.
We all have our different ways.
Whatever works.
Hey, today, with the help of a wonderful author and playwright, we're going to be talking about an Aussie icon. Mm-hmm. King's Bloody Cross.
Yes.
And what happens in King's Cross, Sydney,
Yeah.
of course, the Wayside Chapel.
Yeah.
It's located in the Cross and it's turning 60. This has relevance, I think, for Australia-wide.
Absolutely.
You know,
Ted Noffs founded the Wayside in 1964, and look, it's been a controversial beacon of social justice and inclusivity, and it's a place where people have been welcomed for decades, despite social taboos around race, class, religion, and sexuality. And this is what we're going to be talking about today.
Alana Valentine has written a book published by the amazing folks at Pantera called Wed by the Wayside. It delves into the stories of couples married at Wayside Chapel, many of which were turned away elsewhere, including political refugees, interracial and interfaith marriages, same-sex couples. Now, this is 50 years, right? 50 years before same-sex marriage was legalised. Divorcees, unwed mothers, bikies, sex workers, and more.
I can't wait to hear. She's got some incredible stories to share. So let's welcome Alana into the bathroom.
Welcome, Alana Valentine, to the bathroom. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
First question. Where'd you get your suit from?
Look, I made it. I sewed it with my own hands.
It's so good.
It's so cool. I mean, number one, how cool is her name, Alana Valentine?
Yeah.
It sounds like something from a movie, and then she rocks up in like this incredible tartan suit. Is that like a family tartan?
No, not that I know of. It is just most interesting looking tartan on the shelf. Yeah.
And is it purposefully red, white and blue? Is it because you've got the stripes, right? So it's kind of American. It gives that stars and stripes feel.
No, it was just a colour combination I was taken with that day. So, yeah.
I didn't pick up on Stars and Stripes American.
Oh, well, that's what I see. Stripes, I'm going red,
Yeah.
white and blue and tartan.
Okay.
And it's kind of like a homage to Scottish American roots, maybe. I don't know.
You went deep.
It could be a, oh, Mickey, you're so pretty, thing.
It's really just
Tony Basil moment.
the most attention-grabbing
It sure
choice.
is.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's great. Okay, so you're one of Australia's most acclaimed playwrights. Letters to Lindy, Barbara and the Camp Dog, Wayside Brides. It's described as verbatim theatre.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd never heard of verbatim
No, but our
theatre.
daughter knew
But
it.
I ran it by Bodhi last night, and I said, "Do you know about verbatim theatre?" Oh, yeah. She said, "Can you just explain verbatim theatre?"
So verbatim theatre, it's on the HSC syllabus, which is why Bodhi would know about it. There you go.
Yeah.
Right.
Getting them young, inculcating. But basically it's theatre that's drawn from life. So usually most verbatim theatre will have a community or a group of people that the playwright will actually interview as part of their process of making a play. And it's sort of on a spectrum. You get like what's called pure verbatim, where it's absolutely based on the transcripts. So there was a play recently here about Matthew Shepard, who was murdered in America, a very famous play, The Laramie Project. That's verbatim.
Okay.
So all the theatre makers went to Laramie and interviewed people and typed it up, put it in a play. So here we have pure verbatim like that, or we'll have plays that what I call massage verbatim. So you go and you speak to people, but you sort of collapse characters, you might make up a few scenes, things like that. So it is actually a wonderful kind of documentary theatre, but sieved through the brain of a dramatist.
Okay. And so I imagine people are really more complex than often fiction.
You're so right. You're so right. I mean, people are contradictory. They have, things that you think, well, how can you be that both at once or three things? And, you deal with that all the time, meeting people,
Being
real
married to
people
me,
every
she
day and
deals
married
with
to
it
each
all.
other.
Very true. Well, and we've actually said that, like some of the stories of how couples meet each other, you put that in a movie and people would go, that's a load of crap. You're like, but it really happened. Like some of them have been incredible, the stories, haven't they? So
Yeah. So was this process of your researching and interviewing, is that what inspired your book, Wed by Wayside?
Yes, it was. The additional kicker was that my mother was remarried at Wayside in 1969 herself. And she's been dead for many, many years. And so I suppose I developed this real passion to speak to her about why she'd chosen Wayside and why it was so popular then. Ted Knopfs did maybe 30,000 weddings while he was at the chapel. Yeah. Wow. And so I guess the answer is that I was interested in it as social history, but I was also just wanting to have, frankly, a vicarious experience of interviewing these women of that generation and age as a substitute for not being able to speak to my own mum. Yeah.
And what did you find out more about your mum through the research of this book?
I did, Ali. I found this generation of women who particularly they were on the pivot of kind of like in the early days, like in 1902, 97% of marriages happened in a religious ceremony.
Yeah.
Now, today, in 2021, 81% are done by celebrants. So there's been this, and, the graph shows that where that changes over. The 60s is just that kind of fulcrum where people were going, well, my parents want a religious ceremony, but I don't really, what will I do? And they were looking for alternatives. And Ted Knopfs was sort of I was told, the only show in town. If you were a divorcee, no one would marry you. So I did find out things about, look, it's that thing of just the way women of that age can be quite, my mother used to say, oh, it was just convenient up the corner. And they wouldn't tell you, we're storytellers, so we want, but why? And
don't give
what
me
was the problem?
convenient.
That's right, don't give me
I
convenient.
want some tension.
I want drama. So I found that in a lot of these women, they're very sort of matter of fact, some of them, but then they're also amazingly emotional about what the cost of those choices were, because often they had to go against, and it was men as well, had to go against their parents who sometimes disowned them. If they were Catholics marrying Protestants, if they were Baptists marrying Jews, that's what was happening up at the chapel. It was this amazing place where Ted Knopfs, who founded it with his wife Margaret Knopfs in 1964, said, if you are in love, I will marry you. And, nothing else.
I just think that is the most beautiful thing. And the fact that obviously same-sex marriage was not legal then, but he was still doing that and obviously they weren't able to go out in the real world and call themselves husbands and husbands. But under his eyes, and I guess and that made them feel under the eyes of God in a way, being a reverend, that they were married.
Yes, I had this wonderful contact with a man called Kumar Ponusamy, and his parents, one was a Hindu, his father was Hindu, his mother was Christian, And they got married at the Wayside Chapel, and they were big in the fashion industry in Sydney. They worked for Joseph Brender, who was a very famous Jewish entrepreneur. He set up sort of Katie's and all of these other sort of fashion brands. And so when they went to the chapel, it was this amazing sort of social thing. They had all the, in Hindu weddings, you have all those amazing flowers that they put round. Well, they had them all over the car. They had them all over themselves. She was married in this amazing sari. They had a dyed pink poodle as their accessory.
It was the 60s, man.
It was the 60s, man. They had a dyed pink poodle. Yeah, it was just an extraordinary wedding. And then they told me that one of the truck drivers for Katie's was a woman called Maria, and she married her partner, Vicky, in 1969. And as you say, the state wouldn't recognise it.
Yeah.
But there's this beautiful photo of Vicky and Maria with this very traditional wedding cake. And they're in a real, one's in a suit and one's in a beautiful dress. And you can see that they want to do that thing I'm talking about, which is genuflect to their tradition, but also be bold. But the Kumar's parents were the witnesses for that wedding.
Oh, so beautiful.
Yeah, it was great. And I have actual evidence, I've got photographic evidence that Ted was doing these amazing weddings, yeah.
And so your connection really comes through your mum.
Yeah.
That's right?
That's right.
And you said your mum passed away a long time ago and you didn't have these answers.
Yeah.
What took you to the Wayside? How did you find it that with that connection to your mum and wanting to know more about your mum?
So what happened was, I found this photo, and people who have been married there, I mean, what's interesting, Cam, is that when I said I was writing this play about everyone, I'm not talking just a couple of people, everyone would say, oh, my sister's brother's husband, my mother, my grandfather, my next door neighbour, everyone I met had a story about Wayside.
Wow.
So I went up there. As you say, I kind of saw this photo of my mum, and there's this famous wire sign that says the Wayside Chapel.
Yes.
So she was photographed outside it. So I went up there and I met Graham Long. He was the pastor at the time of the Wayside Chapel, and he had presided over quite a huge renovation of the chapel, so it was a little bit different to what it was in 1964 when it was set up. But he told me this amazing story about how they still conducting weddings, because people know now that Wayside has amazing outreach to street people and the homeless and all of that. So I spoke to a couple of people who've been married there recently whose friends said to them, why are you getting married in a homeless shelter? And it's like, no, there's actually all these other things that Wayside do. But he told me this beautiful story. He had a bride. They dressed her from a dress in the op shop. She was ready to go down the aisle and she started crying. And Graham said to her, why are you crying? He said, oh, I always thought my dad would give me away. So he said, can you hang on a minute? And he literally went out into the street in Hughes Street, waited for the next man who was about 60 to walk past and said, would you come in and give away this bride? And he luckily chose a very dapper gay man who immediately came in and said to this woman, stop that crying. I'm going to you've got to look your best today, and walked her down the aisle as if he'd known her all his life. And to be honest, that became a metaphor for me of what Wayside is for people who, maybe their families rejected them, maybe culturally they don't want to go to the traditional sort of place. They find a family at Wayside. And so to answer your question, Cameron, it's that thing of, well, I was kind of seeking an interest in that as well, because obviously my mother was dead. So I sort of was looking for those stories, but I was also looking for a way to connect with not just the past, but with the present.
Did that story that you just told,
yeah,
was that something that's happening recently, or did that happen way back then?
That's happened recently. So that was like Graham Long was, as you know, John Owen is the pastor there now. He's been there for several years.
Yes.
Graham, I started this research in 2016, so it had happened 2015, 2014, something like that.
Yeah, because I do have a connection with Wayside as well. Yes, so John, who's
Owen,
now, I met him. But I did that TV show, Filthy Rich and Homeless, and I ended up at Bondi and was basically living behind the pavilion. I was there for 4 or 5 nights there. The Wayside was where the guy that was sleeping beside me in a one-man tent, he was involved in a court case because he had a boat. He was living in far north Queensland, and his boat was run over by a runaway tugboat that was unmanned, and he was sleeping in it, in his boat, and the tugboat went over the top of him, and so he lost everything.
Terrible.
So he was now living in the back of the pavilion, sleeping next to me, and going up to the Wayside Chapel with his computer to speak with his lawyer, and they would meet. And he said to me one night, he goes, "Come up to the cross, we'll go to Wayside, we'll get a free feed." And it was just, to me, and seeing the wire sign, the people up there were so kind, and it was just, I know what you're saying, that feeling of inclusiveness, and yeah, we'll take you in and you're okay.
Yeah. I think, in the book I say that I think Margaret and Ted opened a magic portal to people's better sense of themselves. Like when you walk into that place, you go, I can be something more than society tells me I can be. And all of the people since have kept that portal sort of open.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting too, like what you're talking about is that mix of middle class and street. It's not just a place where street people go. There's a lot of very wealthy patrons for Wayside.
Yes.
There's a lot of people who go there to get married who are, like I said, sort of they want it for a society kind of wedding. Jane Powell got married there. Ida Buttrose got married there. She did, yeah. And Andy Gibb got married there. So there's quite a lot of people who sort of like you probably wanted to identify with the work that Wayside's doing. Yeah.
Absolutely. The part of it too, though, as you said before, where people will go, isn't that like a homeless thing? For you to be bringing this back around to relationship and love and weddings and communion in that way, I think it's really beautiful. As you know, we are a relationship podcast.
Yes.
So can you go through in your book, Wed by the Wayside, some of the relationships and some of the stories, incredible stories. Are you able to share a couple of your favourites?
I will. First of all, I will tell you that it is interesting to me how many of the people who I spoke to were still married after 50 years. And almost all of them had, from mild sort of disapproval to utter cutting off from their family and never seen again. Along that spectrum, I always wanted to do a sort of survey of what would be the percentage of people married at Wayside who are still married compared to the general population. Now, that's not to say that people should stay in marriages that don't work, of course not. But it is just really interesting to me that people who married for love in that way, are still together 50 years ago. So the first couple I'll talk about is a man called Sean Smith and his wife Joan. And Joan was a English Protestant and he was an Irish Catholic. And he was adopted in Australia. And he told me this great story about it was so hard at that time to cross that divide that he went to pick up a date. It wasn't Joan, it was someone else. And the father came out with a shotgun and said, if you're a Catholic, you can get off my land and don't come back. So I'm sure some of your listeners might remember how vituperative that Catholic-Protestant divide sort of was. So there's quite a lot of stories in there about that. Sean, like any Irish Catholic, was a great raconteur, I've got to say. I just literally had to push record and he just told me this fantastic story. He was actually, his mother was in one of those Magdalene laundries in Ireland. If you were an unmarried mother, you would be put into these Catholic sort of, they're called laundries, but they're actually like homes. Yep. So he was adopted out of that, given away by his mother, and he told me the whole story of going back to Ireland and finding his mother. But the story of their marriage was that I think he'd been in jail for breaking and entering, and he had befriended the deaf people in jail. And when he got out, Joan, who's not deaf but was friends with other deaf people, she and he had gone on a date and then decided that they were going to get married after many months of dating, and they lived in their car. He said to me during the interview, "Oh, yeah, we graduated up to a tent after a while," which I thought was kind of hilarious. The other story I'll tell you about is a woman called Ursula Zufo, who married what she called a serial bigamist. So he had married, when she found out eventually that she'd married him, because some of your listeners may remember group certificates, you used to get posted them for your tax. So she opened this envelope with his group certificate in it. It had a different name. And he said, "Oh, well, you found me out." And the police told her later that he was a serial bigamist. He'd married like 4 or 5 people in Canada, then come out to Australia and married 4 or 5 more. She had to then, when she wanted to get married again at Wayside to her beau, who was an Italian man, she had to prove that she wasn't really married. So they had to find the very first wife, who happened to live in Redfern. And so
wow.
I know, it was fantastic. So she said he was an Italian, so he knew some people, which I didn't ask any further about. But they found the first wife, and she had to go to court and say, "Yes, I'm the only wife. The rest of you are just mugs," basically. So that was a wonderful story. She ended up getting married to Sergio, and she refused to get married in a Catholic church. And as an Italian Catholic, that was very hard. But they proved that she wasn't really ever legally married, and they got married by Ted Noffs. One of the ones that really affected me was a woman called Isabella Tran, who married a Vietnamese man in the 1970s when there were no Vietnamese in Australia. She said bank accounts didn't even know how to have 3 names in the filling in form, and she said there are a certain number of students. He was there at the University of Canberra studying, and he asked her out, and they eventually got married. And she talked with real pain that her grandmother, who was from Queensland, said that it was the thing that would kill her, that she decided to marry a Vietnamese.
Well, that's a heavy thing to hold on to, isn't it?
Heavy thing to hold on to, yeah. There's a woman called Sally Dolman who was a Qantas flight attendant, and she married her partner, Jeff, and then told a really harrowing story about her baby who was burned. They had to be in a sort of a facility for 6 months with the child, and he lived, and he's now one of Australia's best visual artists. I guess the thing to say is about these marriages is that people often talk not just about the happiness but about the hardship, and you'll know that from being at Wayside. People don't kind of divide their lives into this was good and this was bad. They sort of almost talk about it all as a continuum. And when you interview people, you get both, they don't just stop at the wedding. But yeah, amazing resilience in the couples I've met, and learned a lot about my mother because of that. Yeah.
Beautiful. From listening to these stories and hearing the experiences, what more did you learn about this amazing Ted Noff? Because he sounds incredible, what he was doing. And do you know more about his history, where he came from as well?
Yes. So they set the Wayside Chapel up in 1964. He had been in America and in Chicago, working with street people there. So that notion of a Christian outreach to the poor was he'd brought that back to Australia. And to be honest, he came into, and Wayside Chapel still has some contention about the amount of social justice work that they do and what is the line. The book talks about how Ted was charged with heresy 3 times, so 2 times officially. And what heresy is it means that it was actually technically called unfaithfulness to the doctrines of the faith, meaning that you're not keeping to the exact letter of some of the most important tenets of the faith. And what was amazing for this was that there was a man called John Hall, a reverend who had just graduated from the seminary, and he asked the Methodist Church, it was then, to charge Ted with this because he said that Ted's theology was not what the Methodist Church believed. And I realised that no one had ever found John Hall and talked to him, because I was going through all the newspaper articles, and I rang the Wayside Chapel and I asked John, I said, "Do you know how I get in contact with John Hall? Is he even alive?"
Yeah.
And a friend of a friend of a friend, next day I was speaking to John Hall.
Oh, well done.
And I was expecting this, kind of fire and brimstone, having to hold the phone out from my ear. And he wasn't. He was just fantastic. I said, "Did you ever meet Ted?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, Ted and I got on well. I just completely disagreed with his theology and didn't think he should be part of the church." And I was like, it would be better for my story if you were a real, sort of like
devil worshipper.
That's right. But no, he was an extremely exciting man. He said, "Oh, nobody's ever really rung me before." Yeah, it's interesting, Ted. I mean, I also spoke to Matt Knopfs, who's Ted's grandson, and Matt Knopfs, you will know, is still doing amazing work with the homeless and, youth, particularly young people who have drug problems. He's written a book about addiction, and he and his brother Rupert have been very supportive of my investigations of Ted. And, yeah, it's been amazing kind of connecting with what Ted was trying to do. He died very early of a stroke, Ted. And
how old was he when he passed
like
away?
58, I think he was.
No.
Yeah, he wasn't very old. But he, I think it broke him, the attacks from the church. I mean, Ted knew how to get his mates and his friends, and he had a lot of sectarian, as it were, or secular supporters. But I think it broke his heart that the church turned on him, because they basically were saying this is not in line with our theology. And he used it to gain a lot of publicity and support. But in his heart of hearts, and Matt said this, he thinks that it broke him, But what's been amazing for me, if I can just say, is that young people who came to the play and who I hope will read the book sort of would grab my arm and say, "We didn't know that there was somebody in the past who was trying to do this stuff and who was marrying people. We just thought the past is like this, sort of like this horror show of
Stone
bigotry
Age, dark days.
and discrimination." And it's just really exciting for people to be engaging with the fact that those kind of changes come from somewhere. And to be honest, people sacrifice their lives in a way to make those changes happen. Yeah.
Wow.
The church could use a Ted Knopfs today, right? I mean, the church would probably really want a Ted Knopfs based on the fact that congregations are getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, 44% of Australians are Christians now, or identify on the census. I think 55% identify as some religion in Australia. So, yeah.
Do you know what it used to be?
Oh, it used to be much higher, much higher. Yeah, I don't know the exact figures, but I do know that 44% is, I think it's one of the first times it's dropped below sort of the 50%. I mean, I did interview Bill Cruz, who runs the Exodus Foundation, and he was Ted's sort of 2IC or second in command. He did a lot of work up at the Wayside Chapel, and there was a really painful moment where I interviewed him and I talked to him about, well, what is the cost of going against the church? Because he also had a statue of Korean like comfort women that they said to him, you got to take it down. He's got a church in Ashfield. There was this silence and he started crying. He said, you just become incredibly isolated and lonely. And so you're getting it from inside the church and from outside. So I think Bill Cruz is kind of, my contemporary Ted Knopfs. But look, there are people in all religious organisations trying to liberalise and kind of make more just. It's just that they don't sort of get the airtime. And especially I think there's always this useful polarity between the right-wing religious and the LGBTQI community that is kind of played up. There's a lot more people in the centre and across the margins, than sort of, I don't know, sometimes the media give credit for.
What has researching the book, has it taught you anything about love or marriage?
It's taught me that, yes, that things that start off rocky, the only way can be up sometimes. A lot of these people met in difficult or really circumstances that had a lot of hurdles.
Yeah.
It's taught me about the fact that we are more than our individual love. If I can put it that way. And what I mean by that is that how we get married and how we think about our relationships is also about the times we live in. And one of the things the book does is that it says, well, okay, compare this to your first meeting and your planning for your wedding and what you prioritised. There's a story right at the end of two people who got married in 2018 18, Claire Cahalan and Peter Owen, and they deliberately got married at Wayside because they wanted a connection to their local community. And they were saying, like, we don't want to put all our money and all our planning into these big sort of glamorous weddings. We want to be connected into the place where we live. So that was really interesting to me. It was like they were much more aware of the sort of symbolism of getting married at Wayside. Yeah, I really liked that. But I guess the thing I've learnt most is that we are individuals and we make individual choices, but we are also people of our time. And you know, how you got married, why you got married, and whether it lasts or not, and what are the issues around it are as much about what's going on around you as it is about what's inside the relationship. I've listened to the podcast. I know you sometimes talk about that, like what the culture of the wedding is and what the expectations of the couples are. And I think sometimes, you know, it was really exciting. There's a moment in the book I say I was heading into a field of flower children, which is what it was, you know, in the 60s. They were very hopeful about the ability to change the world through love. Yeah. And there's a moment in the book where I talk about in Australia, are our revolutions kind of more quiet like that? Like people don't, of course they go out on the streets sometimes, but maybe they don't always do that. They vote with their, you know, their feet. They go to Wayside to get married instead of, you know, having a big, different to America is what I was trying to see. How does religious change happen in this country in a different way than it happens in America, you know, where it's more sort of in public and there's a lot more legal things involved. But, yeah, here people just kind of quietly went to Wayside in their thousands because it wasn't till July 1973 that there were celebrants in the country. Right. So that's why it's been this big change. Yeah.
It makes so much sense to me that so many of the marriages have lasted, as you were saying earlier, because it feels like there's so much more consciousness about coupling with your partner when you're doing it at Wayside because, yeah, you fought the extremes of the outside world, whether you're same sex or different religions or different nationalities or whatever. And the fact that you've still chosen for the pure essence of love. And I mean, I know that's what we should all be choosing when we get married, but I feel like in that dynamic and in that little place in the world, it's really conscious. So I think it's sprinkled with so much magic. I'm ready to get married again at the Wayside.
Well, we did. So we've been married 2 times. We got married. First time we got married in the church,
right?
And at another Sydney institution, the Garrison Church, and that's where we. I don't know why we ended up getting married there.
It was just really pretty.
Well, there you go.
There was not much else about it, really.
Right.
We were young. And
that must have been your idea. Because I was born in Melbourne. I grew up in Melbourne.
Dad suggested it. I really don't know why we got married, which is interesting because also, again, going back to the Wayside, you chose the Wayside for a very specific reason where we just got married because it was a nice church. And it was the oldest church in Sydney. We thought that was cool.
That was cool.
It's a beautiful church.
And it's a gorgeous church. And looking back at those pictures and you go, okay, well, you're going to do a traditional wedding. That is a great place to do it. It still is. I mean, it's a stunning place. But then we got married. We renewed our vows in a circle of stones with a celebrant and in the shadow of a teepee. Everyone's standing around in a circle. We were in the middle.
It was very flower child. Yeah, we went back
totally
to the 60s.
Flower child.
Absolutely. Everyone had flower lays on and
So maybe it is a chance to renew it and get conscious again. Hey, what do you hope and who do you hope? Of course, you want everyone to read the book. Who are you writing this for?
Look, when I had the play on, I really thought it would be Ted's cohorts, like, you know, people sort of in their 60s and 70s, Belvoir sort of main audience that would come. And like I mentioned before, what gave me the most joy was as the weeks went on, because it was on for like nearly 6 weeks, it was like younger people coming and saying, why don't we know this about our history? Why aren't we told? And, you know, I might make some scurrilous statement about, well, you're so interested in American history, you know, like you think that's our history. It's not. This is our history. This is what happened in an Australian side street. So, look, to answer your question, I would really love a young audience for this. I've done a few kind of really interesting interviews like Honi Soir and, all, you know, young people who want to find out where the radicals were in our past
Yeah.
and where the visionaries were and who were the leaders who were saying to politicians, this is not good enough anymore. You know, people maybe thinking about getting married and maybe thinking about why you do that, why you make that commitment and why you choose to use your money and your time at particular places rather than others.
It'd be a great subtle gift too to give to, like, you know, parents that were very strict on who they want their child to marry, and you just kind of slip that in and go, just read this book, you know, and then they can maybe get some ideas and be inspired by love is love and be a bit more accommodating to their child.
Yeah.
And who they choose to marry.
Is that sort of like the message that you want?
Yeah, I mean, look, certainly there are people who made that choice and it was not only a difficult choice, but in some cases a fatal choice. You know, like there were people who told me about violence that was put on people because of, like Bill Cruz told me he's had people come to the wedding and try and disrupt it. He's had to have security at the weddings, you know, all of that. So it's not like I'm telling the gorgeous stories, but there's also can be a cost to kind of not having anything more to do with your family ever. Yeah. So I want to celebrate that you can make that choice and still find an alternative family or people who are your tribe. You don't have to stick to those old ways, that there are people who will support a new vision. Yeah.
Do you hope that the play will come back again now that the book is coming out?
May you be a prophet of future possibilities.
She often is that.
But it makes so much sense, you know, to have that in combination, I think would be really beautiful. So
thank you, Ali. It's also that thing, you probably noticed that, and you're from Melbourne, Cam, so you know it's that thing of stories from Sydney don't necessarily travel to Melbourne or to Brisbane, whereas they should. You know, we do stories from Ireland.
Yeah.
We do stories from America.
Yeah, what is that? Did you ever thought about that? Why it's so bordered? You know, what cloistered in, it's you Sydney people. It's like, well, wait a sec. But you know, when something happens nationally or we all band together.
We do.
It's just this parochial state thing. I mean, you're so prolific. Are you always working on the next if you've got a pipe that you're plugging, you know, you've got something new going into the pipe, something finishing at the end of the pipe and something actually happening in the pipe?
Yes, I mean, that's the life of a person working in the arts. You've got things going on because not everything happens at the same time. But I'm very excited. There's actually, like, a lot of plays are now being made into books, and that's because people are interested in the research that playwrights do. I have been commissioned by a company in Wollongong to write about the Lint Cafe siege, and I've interviewed Thomas Yin, who's the partner of Tory Johnson, who died in that siege, and also his mother. So that's actually, they're singing in that. It's just very exciting to deal with these sorts of social issues it's creative nonfiction, I guess. Yeah.
What an interesting tale to tell, and how, I mean, visual it is also, because there it is, like you said, when you said a side street in Sydney.
Yeah.
You know, it's a side street in Sydney that's on one of the most colourful streets in the world.
Absolutely.
You know, and then to have it at that time with all the like the Flower Child, the 60s and the 70s and the music, I can see it all on screen. Well,
there's like lots of stories too about, like, you know, sometimes the Americans would get married at Wayside on their R&R.
Oh, yeah, of course, because they used to come in. The sailors would come in. Yeah,
that's right. And there's a photo of one African-American man in a sort of floppy white hat marrying his partner in a floppy white hat. But, yeah, there were lots of those Vietnam veterans were married at Wayside. So you've got there was lots of bikies. There's a guy called Skull Wiggins who got married at Wayside, and, you know, then they zoomed off on the bike. So, yeah, I think people will be amazed by the tapestry of that.
Yeah. Is there photos to go with?
There sure is, yeah.
I know, because I'm like visualising it all, but I like to actually get to see the people that you're reading about. Yeah. That's magic.
Yeah.
Amazing. The book is Wed by the Wayside. Alana Valentine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, best of luck with it all. I just think it sounds like there's so many layers to the book, clearly, and I think it's going to be a huge hit. I know I'm going to be talking about it for a while. It sounds awesome.
Been lovely meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I cannot wait to read that book. that just absolutely lights me up, the idea of what she's written about.
Yeah. And so many stories in there and the time that it happened.
Yes.
I mean, how relevant it is today in what we're looking for. And, you know, people are looking for something, for substance, you know, and heart. She's such a smart lady. Some of the words she used, I'm like, I'm going to have to look up what pejorative means. She's great.
She's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And the Wayside Chapel is such a beacon.
Yeah, it is.
For so many. And as I probably use too many words, but in my experience of the Wayside Chapel, but they also have another part down at Bondi as well, which is where I found a lot of great humans down there. Such great stories and full of hope, you know.
I was going to ask, I don't think this is the case, but Ted Noffs should have the Order of Australia for the work he was doing with the Wayside.
If he doesn't already.
Yeah, I don't know if he does or not. But as you say, like, to be that kind of a beacon, to be that kind of, to go against the church in so many ways.
Yeah, he's brave.
Very brave. And to be ostracized the way he was, but to continue to marry people because they were in love. There is no greater reason than that.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. We will see. Let's go find it out. We'll go and research that.
We will. We'll research Ted.
We'll do a verbatim play about that.
Okay.
I think it's already done. Alana Valentine's written it in her book, Wed by the Wayside, which crosses state boundaries. So wherever you're listening around the world, certainly inside of Australia, to separate bathrooms, Wed by the Wayside is going to be relevant to you because it's about love.
Correct. All right. Thanks so much for listening, everyone.